Hello, and welcome to what I hope will be an exciting trip through more than 2,000 years of London's history. My name is Sam. I'm a history teacher and lover of all things London. I've crisscrossed the city countless times on the hunt for new and unusual glimpses of London's past, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of these with you today. Let us begin. You're standing in Guildhall Yard, one of the most important places in London's history. In front of you, across the yard, is a grand 4-storey Gothic structure with a large wooden gate at its centre. This is Guildhall itself. Dating from 1411, this building was where the civic, political and commercial lives of London came together. It was a place where royalty came to consult with merchant princes, and where some of the numberless deals have been made that have helped turn London into a thriving commercial hub. It was in the hall itself, the third biggest in England, that Lord Mayors and Sheriffs were elected for centuries. But the space has also hosted its fair share of criminal trials. The Earl of Surrey, who had angered Henry VIII, was condemned after a trial here and was unlucky enough to be executed just weeks before the king's death. His father, the powerful and lucky Duke of Norfolk, had also been arrested, but managed to outlive Henry and therefore avoid the axe. Lady Jane Grey, known as the Queen for 9 days, was tried here alongside her husband during the reign of Mary I, who's often referred to as Bloody Mary. Both were, you guessed it, condemned to death. In the same year, Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury and personal enemy of Queen Mary, was condemned for heresy here. Despite recanting his faith, he was burned at the stake. All very gloomy stuff. Walk forwards so that you're standing in the middle of a horizontal strip of patterned stone, with the gas lamp approximately 4 meters behind you. Turn to look again at the wooden doors of Guildhall. You're now facing north. If you look to the left of the building, directly above the zigzagged roof of the portico, you should be able to see a tall office block with odd, cutaway balconies on the top floor. This building stands adjacent to Wood Street, which runs up the centre of what was London's Roman fort. At the back of the office block, and running 300 metres or so behind Guildhall and around to your right, is London Wall. Turn back to face the way you came in and return to the junction with Gresham Street. I'll meet you at the traffic lights on the left-hand side. Excellent. We now need to cross Gresham Street using the crossing to your left and walk down King Street. Now, walk to the end of King Street, named after my favourite monarch, the Merry Charles II, and laid out after the Great Fire of London in 1666. Now, turn right to cross over Queen Street. The street on your left is Watling Street. Make a mental note of it, as I'll tell you a little about the ancient origins of its name a little further on. Cross over Watling Street, then use the pedestrian crossing just ahead on the left to cross over Queen Victoria Street. We'll be making our way along the pedestrianised Queen Street on the far side. I'll meet you there. Now make your way down this pedestrianised section of Queen Street towards Cannon Street. Watling Street, mentioned earlier, is a different case. We have not yet looked at the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons, from whom England, Angleland, got its name. But Watling Street got its name from the word Æthlingestrata. An Ætheling was a Saxon prince, and strata was, obviously, a street. Put the two together, add a few centuries, and bingo, the result is Watling Street. Keep going, we're heading towards Walbrook. So, you've arrived at Walbrook. Let's stop here for a moment. From where you stand, it doesn't reveal much of its history. Roman London stands 7 meters below the city's surface, and you'd be forgiven for feeling disappointed at what you can see. But looks can be deceptive. Underneath the Bloomberg building to your left are the remains of an ancient Roman temple to a little-known god called Mithras. This secretive deity did not belong to the original family of gods like Jupiter, Juno, and Mars, which we are more familiar with. He was a first-century interloper, possibly from ancient Persia, by way of Greece, or perhaps a Roman invention, a new, fashionable god incorporating a little Eastern exoticism. We will never know. In any case, the fact that he made his way to this far-flung corner of the Roman Empire says a lot for how important London was as a trading hub and how connected it was to the wider empire. Stop here for a moment in the open square. If you were standing here at any time until around 1600, you would have very wet feet. You're standing on top of one of London's 21 subterranean rivers. First mentioned in 1274, the name Walbrook goes back much further, to Saxon times. You'd be forgiven for thinking that it might have got its name because it ran alongside an old Roman wall. Given that it must have flowed under the Roman city wall and brought fresh water into the city, it's certainly possible. The more convincing and more exciting explanation, though, is that Walbrook derives from the Saxon words Weala and Brock, meaning Brook of the Foreigners. So who were these foreigners? The answer is the British natives who the Saxons supplanted. Let's get moving again. I'll tell you the rest while you walk. Retrace your steps back down Walbrook to Cannon Street. Turn left onto Cannon Street. The large building that will be on your right across the street is Cannon Street Station. Stop for a moment opposite. This busy station has around 23 million people entering and exiting the station each year. Nowadays, the area around Cannon Street is dominated by corporate offices, but the station itself stands on top of government offices of the ancient Roman sort. Just as modern office blocks have their green spaces for employees in a bid to boost well-being and productivity, so did the Roman ones. I'll tell you more while we walk, so continue along Cannon Street. Archaeological remains show that Roman civil servants would have enjoyed tended gardens and glassy pools. Interestingly, the concrete foundations were so strong that they resisted explosives in the 1860s when the station was built. Imagine the changes the local British would have witnessed in just a few generations. From being citizens of one of the most powerful empires the world had ever seen, in one of its greatest trading centres, benefiting from all the organisation and engineering that came with it, they were relegated to the status of foreigners in their own land, eking out a living on the banks of the Walbrook. Continue walking, crossing Salters Hall Court. In case you're interested, the Salters, or dry salters the hall is named after, were the people you would go and see in the Middle Ages if you needed chemical products like glue, varnish, or dye. Stop here for a moment in front of the nondescript building on your left. It currently houses the Bank of China. Have a look at the building. Can you see a limestone monument set within the wall of the building? It protects a niche in which stands a stone roughly 2 feet in height, bearing a faint groove on its top. Have you spotted it? This is London Stone, one of London's least known treasures. For many centuries it was believed to be the stone of Brutus, killer of Julius Caesar, who supposedly brought it to London. "So long as the stone of Brutus is safe," ran one city proverb, "so long shall London flourish." The first reference to the stone comes from the early 10th century. In fact, the stone probably came from the small county of Rutland, along with much more stone of the same type used by the Romans and Saxons for construction. Originally embedded in the ground opposite where it now stands, it's been a landmark for centuries. Some people became known by how close they lived to the stone. One of these was Aylwin of London Stone, the father of Henry Fitz Aylwin, who was the first mayor of the City of London. When you're ready to get going, with the Bank of China building on your left, turn left into the small lane just ahead, St Swithin's Lane, and keep walking. You're now walking up St Swithin's Lane, a passage that, despite all the modern offices on either side, still gives an impression of what many of London's medieval streets would have felt like. Then, as now, every square foot of the city was expensive, so people built upwards. By the 1500s, timber-framed buildings could be 6 stories high. They were highly flammable and prone to collapsing. Each successive floor of the building would lean a little closer out to the centre of the road. This drowned out the sunlight and made the road that much more dangerous, both because crime was more easily conducted in the low light and because walking through congested lanes full of mud and manure in semi-darkness made walking that much more treacherous. Stop here, in front of the imposing building on your left, called Mansion House, the official residence of the Lord Mayor of London. Turn to face the building. Confusingly, the Lord Mayor is not the same as the Mayor of London. The Lord Mayor is in charge of the City of London Corporation, which runs the portion of the city that sits inside the old Roman walls. The Mayor of London is in charge of the whole of Greater London, which consists of the modern City of London beyond the Roman walls. Since medieval times, the different guilds and livery companies of the City of London were able to use their economic clout to gain rights and privileges from the king, who was always in need of cash. It was the guilds who voted for the Lord Mayor, and the Lord Mayor always came from one of the guilds, and always looked after the city's economic interests. Even today, a representative of the City of London is allowed to sit in attendance in Parliament and lobby in the city's interests, the only lobbyist with this privilege. The Mansion House was completed in 1752, and sits on the site of an earlier market. Before it was built, the Lord Mayor would stay at one of the city's livery halls. Given that a new Lord Mayor was elected every year, this was not a convenient way to run a city, and I think you'll agree, the building in front of you is an elegant solution. It's also a practical one. It might surprise you, but even today the Lord Mayor is the chief magistrate of the City of London, and so the Mansion House was built to accommodate 10 holding cells. 9 of these were for men, while one, known as the Birdcage, was for women. The most famous woman to be held here was Sylvia Pankhurst, the famous suffragette, who was convicted on the 23rd of October 1920 for publishing seditious material and sentenced to 6 months' imprisonment. Now we'll visit the Bank of England and need to cross multiple roads. I'll meet you at each crossing, but for now cross Mansion House Street, the road immediately behind you. Excellent. Now continue to Princes Street to your right and cross there. I'll meet you on the far side, on the corner of Princes Street and Threadneedle Street. Stop here for a moment and turn to your left to have a look across the road at the enormous classical facade of the Bank of England, otherwise known as the Old Lady of Threadneedle Street. Established in 1694, it's the second oldest central bank still in operation, and it's been a model for most central banks around the world. The reason for its existence, at least initially, was to help give the government a reliable source of credit during some very expensive wars against Britain's oldest enemy, France. The bank's credit was crucial to the emergence of England as a European and world power. The bank was first located on the Walbrook, visited earlier in the walk. It moved to its current location on Threadneedle Street in 1735. Since then, it's been expanded, demolished and rebuilt twice more, and now boasts 845,000 square feet, or almost 80,000 square meters of floor space. That's the equivalent of more than 10 football pitches. In 1780, during the anti-Catholic Gordon riots, a mob attacked the building and had to be dispersed by the military. From then on, the brigade of guards responsible for dispersing the crowd continued to protect the bank, every night, for 193 years. Now, have a look to your right at another great classical facade, the Royal Exchange. The origins of this building are even older than the Bank of England's. Having nowhere else to go, London's 16th century merchants had been forced to meet out of doors to discuss business, and were therefore subjected to crowds and filthy streets. It took a man called Thomas Gresham to change things. He'd seen the success of the Bourse, or Exchange, in Antwerp. There, merchants could meet one another in comfort and in private, share news, discuss business, and establish companies to pool risk. Over the years, Antwerp had been used to choke off trade to and from England by her enemies, particularly Spain, so it made sense to build an exchange in London. The exchange was completed in 1567, and Elizabeth I visited the building shortly after, changing its name to the Royal Exchange. Sadly, the original Tudor building burned down in the Great Fire of London, as did its replacement in 1838. The current building was opened in 1844 by Queen Victoria. Interestingly, the steps of the Royal Exchange are one of the places from which a new king or queen is proclaimed. Let's get moving. When you're ready, cross Cornhill Street, just next to the statue of Wellington on his horse and on the far side from the Bank of England. Now, let's continue walking down Lombard Street, which has its own roots in finance dating back 700 years. Lombard Street is named after another group who came to make their fortunes in London, goldsmiths from Lombardy in northern Italy. They were invited to London and granted this area of land by King Edward I, who ruled from 1272 to 1307. This begs the question, why was Edward so generous? The answer was simple: money, debt, and anti-Semitism. The goldsmiths of Lombardy were one of the closest things in medieval Europe to bankers, though they really acted more like pawnbrokers. Jews were also associated with money lending. Excluded from belonging to guilds or owning and working the land, it was one of the few professions available to them. Invited after the Norman invasion to provide the crown with a source of credit, they had built a community around a small road near Mansion House, which still bears the name Old Jewry. In 1290, Edward decided to use the widespread anti-Semitism of the age to renege on his debts to Jewish moneylenders and drive them out of the kingdom. However, the crown still needed a reliable line of credit, and the Lombards filled the gap. It was not until 1656, during the rule of Oliver Cromwell, that the Jews were welcomed back into the kingdom, by which time the original Lombards had long since assimilated into the melting pot of London. Keep going along Lombard Street. We're about to visit the long-lost Roman Forum, so cross over the street ahead, Gracechurch Street. I'll meet you on the other side. Turn left and continue up Gracechurch Street. You're now on top of the entrance to the ancient Roman Forum. This was the beating commercial, political, and civic heart of the city, and it was huge, the largest forum north of the Alps. As you walk up Gracechurch Street, try to imagine an open square enclosed on all sides and packed with stalls selling a dizzying selection of goods from across the Roman Empire. From Mediterranean olives to garum, a much-loved fish sauce, to silks, spices, and ivory. The market had everything that the 60,000 inhabitants of Londinium could ask for or imagine. The open space, enclosed on all sides by an arcade, extended out 84 metres to your left and right-hand sides and a further 167 metres ahead of you. At the far end of the square, you would have seen an imposing 3-storey basilica looming above the surrounding buildings, the law court and the administrative centre of the city. Keep going, I'll meet you at the entrance to Leadenhall Market. Here we are, at the entrance to Leadenhall Market, on the right. Before we move further into the market, it's worth pointing out that we're still in the ancient Roman Forum and therefore in 2 markets at the same time. There's been a market on and off on this site for almost 2,000 years. On the far side of the entrance to Leadenhall Market, opposite where you stand now, you should be able to see a barber's shop called Nicholson and Griffin. The cellar of this shop contains the excavated remains of an ancient Roman arch belonging to the Roman basilica mentioned earlier. Londinium's 2nd century population was around 60,000. The population of London in 1711, the year St. Paul's Cathedral was completed, was around 600,000. Yet the Roman basilica was longer than St. Paul's and almost as wide. Now walk into Leadenhall Market, where we will temporarily leave behind Roman London and enter the medieval city. Stop when you reach the central junction of the market and look around at the cast iron arches that make it such a beautiful spot. I'll meet you there. Welcome to the heart of Leadenhall Market. This market originally got its name from a nearby mansion which had a lead roof, a 14th century luxury rare enough to be commented upon. Foreigners, anyone from outside London, were allowed to sell their poultry, butter and cheese here, when other markets were closed to them. In 1411, the City of London bought the estate, mansion included, and in 1445 it became a general market for poultry, victuals, grain, eggs, butter and cheese. Later on you could also buy leather and wool here. The market burned down in the Great Fire of London and had to be rebuilt. If your back is to the Grace Church Street entrance, you'll want to turn right and head down Lime Street Passage. Continue till you reach Lime Street. I'll meet you there. Welcome back. You've reached Lime Street on the south side of Leadenhall Market. Cross over Lime Street and turn right to continue walking. You might think this street got its name because the citrus fruit was sold in the market. In fact, the medieval street got its name from the lime burners and sellers who once lived here. Limestone, once baked, became lime or quicklime, an important component in cement. Continue walking along the left-hand side of Lime Street. We're heading towards Fenchurch Street. When you reach it, cross over to the other side. Walk down Philpot Lane on your right, staying on the left-hand pavement. While we walk, let me tell you a little bit about Fenchurch Street, which you've just crossed. Running through the heart of the ancient city, it's unearthed some interesting finds, from 3,000-year-old Celtic funerary urns to the remains of 3 Roman pavements. It was also on Fenchurch Street that Princess Elizabeth, later Elizabeth I, enjoyed a meal of pork and peas after being released from the Tower of London in 1554 by her Catholic sister, Mary. She had been suspected of involvement in a rebellion, but no evidence could be found, and she was grudgingly let go and remained the heir to the throne and a Protestant. Keep going towards Eastcheap Street. Cross over the road ahead, Eastcheap. You're going to head down that small street in between the buildings, Botolph Lane. I'll meet you there. Continue down Botolph Lane. We're heading towards Monument Street. The street is named after the monument that commemorates the end of the Great Fire of London in 1666. I'll point it out when you reach the street before turning left. Pudding Lane, which we'll see very shortly, was where the fire started, and Botolph Lane, which you're walking down now, is where Christopher Wren is thought to have lived while the new St Paul's Cathedral was being built after the medieval cathedral had burned down. Continue walking, and I'll see you soon. Stop here for a minute and look up Pudding Lane to your right. Pudding Lane sounds like one of the tastiest street names of London, but it probably comes from a medieval term, animals' puddings, which referred to guts and entrails. These would have been brought down from the butcher's shops in Eastcheap to the dung barges in the river. Far from whetting the appetite, the smell must have been appalling to local residents, especially as not all butchers could be bothered to complete the journey. Pudding Lane is famous for being a place where the Great Fire of London started on the 2nd of September 1666. The fire went on to gut the medieval city. 13,200 houses, 87 parish churches, and St Paul's Cathedral were among the casualties. Stop for a moment when you reach Monument Street and have a look to your right. That tall column is the monument to the end of the Great Fire of London. If you fancy a closer look at Monument, which is definitely worth a visit, it's open from 9:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the summer months until 5:30 or 5:50 p.m. in the winter. There, you'll have the opportunity of climbing 311 steps to the top. A memorable experience if you have the time and the energy. Otherwise, if you prefer, let's keep moving. Cross over Monument Street, then turn left and continue as it bends round into Lower Thames Street. I'll meet you at the junction. At the bottom of Pudding Lane, roughly where you're standing now, was the original Roman bridge across the river. Made of wood, it would have amazed the original Celtic inhabitants of the area. Burnt down during Boudicca's revolt in around 60 AD, it was rebuilt in the 1st century. The bridge would have allowed for uninterrupted movement of foot, horse and wheeled traffic across the Thames, linking the 4 major road systems north of the Thames with the 4 to the south, which is to your left. It was probably because of the bridge's importance in connecting the north with the south and the river's use for trade and travel to east and west that gave London its strategic importance. Continue along Lower Thames Street to the corner ahead. I'll meet you there. You are now facing the Church of St Magnus the Martyr. Stop in front of it. This is a Grade 1 listed church with an ancient pedigree. There has been a church here since at least the 12th century, though the current building dates from after the Great Fire of London. It was designed by Sir Christopher Wren, architect of St Paul's Cathedral, and is one of 51 churches he built after 87, or 88, the numbers I found have been different, of London's parish churches were totally destroyed. The church gets its real importance from its location, which I'll tell you more about at our next stop. Walk into the churchyard and stand beneath the tower. I'll meet you there. To your left, just in front of the church tower, is a blue plaque which records that this was part of the roadway approach to London Bridge between 1176 and 1871. The church is open to the public from Tuesday to Friday, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. If it's open, go in, and soon you will see a detailed model of the medieval bridge. Welcome to the River Thames. The river that you see in front of you is much narrower and much faster flowing than for most of its history. By early modern standards, London was a very busy trading city. While the main wharves for larger trading vessels would have been downriver to your left, small and medium-sized boats for ferrying people and goods would have been scattered across the water in front of you in large numbers. Given the congestion that you would likely have experienced on the bridge, you might have decided to travel by boat instead. The water boatmen that plied the river were numerous and made a good living despite the exhausting nature of the work. What else might you see from where you stand or sit? At the far end of London Bridge, you may have spotted part of the imposing stone gatehouse that protected the city from attack. Elevated above it, on long wooden spikes, were the severed heads of traitors, a warning to those entering the city. These were dipped in hot tar to preserve them a while and deter crows, and you would probably be horrified by the strips of muscle, sinew and hair which continued to hang, swaying in the wind, months after the heads were first put in place. Keep going alongside the river. Now, turn left and follow Old Billingsgate Walk back to Lower Thames Street. I'm afraid there's one more boring set of directions before our next proper stop. Once back at Lower Thames Street, cross over to the other side using the pedestrian crossing on your right. Stop for a moment once across Lower Thames Street. The office block in front of you is typically modern and generic, in a style found all over the world, cut adrift from a specific sense of place. That could be seen as a criticism, but the same could be said of the ancient building upon which this one now stands. Roman bathhouses were made to almost identical plans and from almost identical materials wherever you were in the Roman Empire, and the Billingsgate Baths were no exception. These baths probably belonged to a private house. They consisted of a cold room, frigidarium, warm room, tepidarium, and hot room, caldarium. It was in use until the 5th century, when London began its sad decline. Let's keep moving. Continue to your right and then turn immediately left onto St Dunstan's Hill. Turn right and follow St Dunstan's Hill as it curves upwards. In front of you and to your left is what remains of the former parish church of St Dunstan in the east, a silent witness to some of the most tumultuous events in London's history. If you like, you can take a moment to enjoy this secluded space before continuing up St Dunstan's Hill to reach Great Tower Street. The parish dates from the 13th century and was one of the wealthiest churches in the city. Only the rector of St Magnus the Martyr, which we've just seen, received more money from his parishioners. Like St Magnus, St Dunstan was rebuilt by Christopher Wren after the Great Fire of London. It was not as lucky as St Magnus during the Second World War, however. The main building of the church was destroyed by a bomb in 1941 and is now a memorial garden. When you're ready, continue up St Dunstan's Hill towards Great Tower Street. I'll meet you there. Continue up St Dunstan's Hill towards Great Tower Street. I'll meet you there. As you get to the corner, you can see an imposing church ahead. That's All Hallows Tower, and it's our next stop. Welcome to All Hallows by the Tower. This is probably the oldest parish church in London, dating back to 675 AD. This is one of the only churches of the city to escape the Great Fire. Some of the church walls date back to the 13th and 14th centuries, and despite extensive remodelling over the subsequent centuries, a Saxon arch from much earlier can be seen inside. The history of this church actually extends far beyond, or you might say, archaeologically speaking, below the 7th century. In 1926, a Roman pavement was discovered beneath the church, at what was then street level. It's one of the many interesting items you can see if you decide to pay the church and its small museum a proper visit. I strongly recommend it. Looking down on the pavement, I like to imagine the footfall of ancient Londoners moving across its surface as they went about their daily lives, much as we have been doing on our walk today. Let's get moving. I'll tell you more while you walk. Continue along Bywood Street, staying to the left of the church. Most of the tens of thousands who have worshipped at All Hallows since the church was first consecrated would have lived lives very different from our own. Yet the need for community, family, ritual, laughter and gossip were all just as much a part of their lives as ours. Some of the many individuals who worshipped here became famous, and there is a particular link to the founding fathers of the United States. John Quincy Adams, the 6th President of the United States, was married here, and William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, was a member of the congregation. Keep going along Bywood Street. I will meet you shortly. Now, turn left to cross over Tower Hill at the pedestrian crossing. I'll meet you on the far side. Continue straight ahead with the crossing behind you, and you will soon come to the site of the ancient scaffold where many met their deaths. Stop when you get to it. Execution was, and in the places where it continues to be practiced, still is, a symbolic act. The place of execution, the type of execution, and the rituals surrounding the execution all say a lot about the values, beliefs, and political realities of the time. You should, by now, be able to see 4 brass plaques bearing the names of nobles and priests who were executed, from Simon of Sudbury, who died here in 1381, to Simon Fraser, who followed him to the grave 366 years later. As you will see, this is a public place, though now a relatively peaceful one. When there was to be an execution, the surrounding area would undergo a radical transformation. A wooden platform would have been erected where we stand, many feet off the ground, the stage for a real-life drama of death and redemption. Seating and standing areas were also built to better accommodate the thousands of spectators who would crowd into the area on execution day. Local businesses would bake pies for sale, local printers would publish souvenir guides, and against the backdrop of the tower itself, the condemned would meet their end. Follow the path back towards the main road, then turn left and walk through the World War I Memorial. Stop on the far side as soon as you have a decent view of the Tower of London and can hear my voice. The Tower of London is one of London's most iconic and significant historical sites, and I can't let you go without telling you a bit about it. During Shakespeare's day, most Londoners thought that the Tower of London was built by Julius Caesar. That turned out to be wishful thinking on the part of the English. The Tower of London was actually the brainchild of William the Conqueror. The famous Battle of Hastings in 1066 did not mark the end of English resistance to the Normans. After the battle, leading Saxon nobles retreated to London and named a young prince called Edgar King of England. The River Thames and the walls of the city made London a tough nut to crack, so William negotiated with the city's leaders and reached an agreement. In return for loyalty and financial assistance, London would be granted economic privileges. But William was not a trusting man, and he knew that without guarantees, deals could be broken. The White Tower, at the centre of the complex in front of you, was built to remind the city who was boss. From here, William and his successors could control the river. If you controlled the river, you controlled London. Over the following centuries, the Tower of London has been a fortress, a menagerie, a barracks, a treasury, a mint, not the edible sort, a palace, and a prison. Toward the end of the Wars of the Roses, the tower witnessed the bloody implosion of a royal dynasty. In 1478, King Edward IV had his brother, the Duke of Clarence, killed here. He was supposedly drowned in a barrel of sweet wine. When Edward himself died, his youngest brother, Richard of Gloucester, became regent to his two young nephews, the heirs to the throne, who were confusingly called Edward and Richard. He sent them to the Tower, supposedly for their own safety, but probably had them killed there, clearing his own path to the throne. Duke Richard became King Richard III in 1483, but was himself killed 2 years later at the Battle of Bosworth. 7 years, 5 deaths, 1 dynasty destroyed. It's a little unfortunate that our walk is going to end here on such a dark and grisly note, but this is the end. From here, it's a short climb up the steps into Tower Hill Station. I hope you've enjoyed our time together. I've certainly enjoyed writing and sharing the walk with you. And until next time.